For the New York State AFL-CIO, I'm Darcy Wells, and this is Union Strong.
I'm proud.
I'm proud.
I am proud.
I'm proud to be Union Strong.
To be Union Strong. Be Union Strong.
To be Union Strong.
I'm a teacher, and I'm Union Strong.
I wouldn't have it any other way.
A powerful new tool is available that shows exactly how much New Yorkers rely on federal funding and what the recently passed federal budget bill will mean to New Yorkers. If you care about things like health care, food programs, renewable energy programs, jobs, public education, this conversation is for you. Joining me on the podcast is the New York State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli. Comptroller DiNapoli, thank you for joining me.
Darcy, thank you for having me.
And it was your office that put out this report, this guide. And I know you put it out in May, but it's still relevant now.
Sure.
And it kind of is like a roadmap, isn't it, to show where these federal dollars go. Can you tell me about it?
Yeah. We're all about transparency, and certainly with all of the changes coming out of the new administration, I guess not so new administration, New Yorkers want information, answers. What is it going to mean? And it's going to be an evolving picture. And unfortunately, some of that picture is not too positive in terms of the impact on New York. So we created this tool, encourage everyone to go on our website and look at it, because we want to be more clear. We talk big numbers sometimes. In any given year, 35 to 40% of the state budget is federal funds. But we want people to see exactly where that money is going, because the kinds of programs that are impacted varies, and the kinds of agencies that are most impacted also varies. So we'll update that information as we learn more. But suffice it to say, with everything coming down, particularly on healthcare and safety in their programs, that's where you're going to see the biggest hit to our state.
So one of the biggest hits is going to be to Medicaid.
Yeah.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I think some of the disconnect is people might think, well, I'm not on Medicaid. And I think a lot of people think maybe they don't know people who rely on Medicaid. But it not only is going to obviously impact so many people who are going to lose that service, but even it's going to impact everybody, right?
Oh, sure.
One reason, because the money's not going to be there in the budget, but it goes beyond that, especially in particular areas of the state. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. It is a big program. It's an expensive program. It's a generous program, because New York believes we should provide people with health care and take care of them. And I think you raise an important point. Medicaid obviously starts out with a mission for poor people, based on income. But the program has been expanded, and it includes people with disabilities. Families may have a disabled loved one. Often they end up on Medicaid. We don't have a long-term care program in our country, and loved ones, parent, grandparent, sometimes have to end up in a nursing home. And many folks who might not be defined as poor, but under the law, you work with an elder attorney, and you know how to protect assets, spend down, and so on. And you have many middle-class families that at a certain point in time, member of their family will end up needing a nursing home, and they will go on Medicaid as part of the program. What you've also seen, Medicaid and Obamacare and the Essential Plan and federal money that helped to expand access to health care, New York has taken appropriate use of those options. So what's very interesting is that you go back probably over a decade, we had about 10% of our population was not covered with health care insurance or health care coverage. Now we're down to less than 5% of New Yorkers without health care coverage. And a big part of that is because of the Medicaid expansion, the Essential Plan, and so on. What's happening now is the direct hits on Medicaid, and particularly on the Essential Plan. So what you're going to see, to your point, first of all, some folks that are on the Essential Plan now, some of those will qualify for the traditional Medicaid, but you're going to see some folks lose their health care coverage totally. It's estimated that about 1.5 million New Yorkers will lose health care coverage. So it's going to be poor communities across the state. In many of our rural communities, you're also talking about the hospitals, and the people who work at the hospitals are going to be affected. We have so many of our hospitals in poorer communities, certainly in rural communities, barely making it. And Medicaid has been an important source of the revenue to keep the hospital open. I'm not predicting hospital closures, but the kind of pressure to keep those healthcare facilities open is going to be severe and going to be dramatic and hurt people.
Remind us what the essential plan is. Who uses that?
So the essential plan is in terms of income would be more flexible than traditional Medicaid. So it's some folks who couldn't be covered through other kinds of insurance through employment. We still have largely employment based insurance. So it created another opportunity. New York and I think the other state was Minnesota were the two states that opted in to participate in the program, and it was incentivized with federal dollars to support it. And that's what they're trying to pull back. And what does it mean in the long run? Fewer people having health care coverage? Well, they're still going to need health care at a certain point. So they'll end up going to the emergency room of the hospital to be their doctor's office, usually when they're sicker, more ill, costs more money. We'll have to pay for it eventually anyway, right? Those costs end up getting absorbed in various charity pools and so on. So in terms of what we should be doing, which is making sure people have healthcare coverage, doing more on prevention and health education, we're going in the opposite direction, which at the end of the day is just going to cost us all a lot more money, and we'll all have to pay more because of that.
Right. One of the other big hits is going to be through the Food Assistance Program, or SNAP.
SNAP.
Who is that going to
Used to call it food stamps, right?
Right.
Well, we already know in our state, and certainly some of this continues to be the impact of COVID, where you really had big issues of food insecurity. But even now, you still have about 1 in 8 households in our state are food insecure. And so now the SNAP benefits, the nutrition benefits, again, pulling them back. It's interesting how they're doing it. It's part of their the meanness of this approach. So it's not only cutting back funds in some cases in the situations we're talking about, it's also increasing administrative costs. So it's a double hit: less money and more administrative cost. And also part of the way they're doing this, from what we had first analyzed with the nutrition programs that we're talking about, they're phasing it in, and some of these cuts that we're talking about, what a shock, will not happen until after the midterm elections are over.
Right.
So if people aren't feeling the pain yet, they're going to say, well, maybe it's not going to be that bad. And then they're going to feel it, after the political season. So again, why we want to inform people, make sure that they know. But it just seems that we're hitting those with greatest need, and need is, I think, broadly defined. It's not just the poorest people; it's people in the middle who are getting squeezed. And what is the purpose of all of this? Fund tax cuts.
I was going to say, when you talk about the whole meanness of it, you're right.
Driving up the deficit, which will cost not just us, but kids and grandkids as well, generations to come, a record deficit level. And it's always interesting because, the crowd in charge now always are supposedly the fiscal conservatives and the budget hawks. I mean, somehow that went out the door. So, the remaking, not to be partisan, but for a moment I will be, the remaking of the Republican Party into a MAGA party, there is no real concern about fiscal responsibility. It's trying to fit an agenda. So let's drive up the deficit. Let's cut programs. Let's cut the safety net, healthcare, nutrition, education, go down the list. And let's have tax cuts that will benefit the wealthiest in the country. It's unfortunate that people didn't see this coming. The Congress was elected, right? But I hope people will keep in mind what's happening. And obviously from my perspective, the midterm elections can't come soon enough.
And that's what we're trying to do this for, right? To educate people and let them know. What about some of the other areas? And I think that's what's so important about this guide and how valuable it is because it also, there's federal dollars for the state workforce. So I think some positions are probably fully funded. Many are partially.
Yeah.
And in certain departments, I know, especially the Department of Labor,
Yes.
what kinds of services are we talking about that these jobs are
Well,
funded for?
such a good question, and something that I think was even an eye-opener for me in terms of looking at the numbers. So Department of Labor has very important responsibilities. Commissioner Reardon works very hard. Her team works very hard. Unemployment, administering that program, key part of the responsibility. With what we saw with the federal money coming in to administer, particularly unemployment, you're talking about over 80% of the staff lines are tied to federal funds. Department of Health, which does so very much, about 25% of that department staff is tied to federal funding. And so the guide, as you point out, goes down the different agencies and shows the numbers. But it's a very significant consequence in terms of staff. So what does it mean? Does it mean the state is going to have to backstop that money? Probably in some cases we will have to. Will it mean some people will be let go? Will it have an impact on the delivery of services? I mean, these are questions that, uh, obviously the governor's office is going to have to grapple with. Already um, the governor's made announcement just very recently about having to ask all the agencies to tighten belt. The hit, particularly with the healthcare side, in the current year budget is about $715 million. It's projected to be at least $3 billion hit next year. And we're still evaluating, you just had Congress pass, another bill that's cutting all kinds of programs. So part of the challenge for it's hard to keep up with everything that they're doing and to cost it all out and then to see when the actual hit happens. You also know the budget was done this year, largest budget in state history. But I think about $94 billion of it was dependent on federal funding. And although we have some reserves still, there really was no contingency built in as far as anticipating what some of these cutbacks may mean. The budget allows for the governor to have up to, I think it's $2 billion in her discretion to have cost savings. If the legislature doesn't agree with her choices, they can come back and have another kind of plan. But I mean, I think that's going to be the issue for the state, for the city, particularly New York City, very important part of the whole picture in the state and local governments across the state. What will this all mean? And will it mean having to come up with new revenue sources or cut spending? And again, the state budget already had, out-year budget caps, which are only going to be made worse by the decisions here coming out of Washington. It really is. I always like to say it's not just about the specific cuts and programs. It's really about a major restructuring of the federal-state relationship. And New York, we've kept up that version of the old Senator Moynihan report about how much you send to Washington versus what we get back, tax receipts versus programs. Much of this driven by the pandemic relief and the Biden era. New York went from being a donor state in terms of sending more money there than we get back. We're getting money back. We're on the plus side, and the numbers have been getting a little more narrow in terms of what it's been. But in the last report that we did, which I guess was for 2023 data, for every dollar we sent to Washington, we got back $1.06. Well, now it's very clear with this restructuring and the budgetary impact, we're going to go back to being instead of a state that benefits, is going to be a donor
state, right?
And maybe with some significant numbers there. So that's another concern.
Well, one of the other areas we get federal funding for is all of these renewable energy projects, which has been a huge program that's creating jobs and putting us on the path to clean energy. What is that going to mean?
Again, nothing good. I mean,
because those projects, some of them have started, that
already committed,
right?
And they're pulling back. So again, this is where we have to look at the fine print, because some of those projects apparently will be grandfathered in. Some of them won't be, but there is an agenda that's very much denying climate change, denying the need to be part of the transition to a low carbon economy. As you know, New York State has very ambitious climate goals, which in some of our audits we pointed out we've not done a good job in doing the planning and implementation to meet those goals. But this is just going to make that challenge even more difficult. So again, I think your question makes the good point. I mean, there is the big issue of climate change and how we deal with it. But anytime you invest in infrastructure, especially energy infrastructure, you're also creating jobs, quality jobs. Most often, thankfully, union jobs, which is very important. And, credit to the AFL-CIO and Mario Salento and the team for really being leaders in having the larger community understand we need to deal with the climate issue. And this is an opportunity for us to have people working. We've had so many good programs, collaboration with the higher ed sector, to have people trained. I'm a Long Islander, so wind has been a big initiative down there. And Stony Brook's had a special collaboration, with labor to make sure people are trained appropriately. So we've been laying the groundwork in a very positive way. Well, this is attempting to bring us backward. And again, to what end? Because they have an agenda which says climate change isn't happening. Well, you just look at these severe weather events. We've had our share of them in New York. We see what's happening in other parts of the country. You can't deny that climate change is real. And so we have to be part of that transition, and we have to be promoting clean energy alternatives. And thankfully, New York is not backing down on our goals, but we're gonna have a real hard time, meeting those goals if we don't have the kind of federal support that had been counted on. So it's money for projects, it's money that local governments had already planned for, and it's also for individuals. Some of the tax credits, that when people were, let's say
Putting
putting
the
solar
panels,
panels or
sure.
whatever.
Right.
Again, some of that is not phasing out right away, but if you don't get your paperwork in soon, you're gonna lose out on it. So, again, that's one of the challenges. There's an immediate hit, and you're gonna see
It gets worse.
it gets worse.
Right.
Exactly.
I also wanted to ask you about public education.
Yeah.
The cuts there. What
Sure.
could that mean?
Again, what's their agenda? I mean, they have a Secretary of Education that wants to dismantle the Department of Education. And, the education dollars that we get go to the most disadvantaged students and the ones with the greatest need. So you look at, for instance, New York City, if I could use that as an example, where they're less dependent on the federal budget than the state is. But the money that goes to New York City, a big chunk of it is targeted for the schools, and again, for the most disadvantaged and at-risk students. So it's gonna disproportionately affect the neediest students. So, again, the dollars are significant, but it's part of a whole larger agenda which says, we're just not gonna support education programs. They're trying to promote more vouchers for people not to be in public schools. Again, very counter to what we believe here in New York, where we've had a record investment in public education. What will it mean for higher education as well? You see how, I mean, just recently, the CUNY chancellor was really given a very hard time down there in Washington. It's part of that overall attack that we've seen on higher education across the country. So, healthcare, nutrition, education, energy, you go down a long list of programs and priorities that I think New Yorkers have embraced for a long time. And you're seeing the federal actions really being an assault across the board.
So we've painted a pretty dire picture.
Yeah.
But it's reality. It's law now. What would be your message to our audience? What can they do? Is it a matter of just educating themselves about it, to maybe holding people accountable? What would your message be?
Well, it's a combination. I mean, so people need to not be ignoring what's going on, so they're informed voters, especially if some of this may hit them personally. It is important to continue to communicate with your legislators. Obviously, the state level always, but in this case, the federal level is very important. Some folks are living in districts that are represented by Republicans, and some of those districts are going to be very competitive in the next elections. Very important that the voices be heard. It's interesting. One of the areas that was a little bit of a bright spot was the increase as far as the SALT deduction, which a lot of folks in the state are a bit concerned about those changes. It's temporary, but it's been increased from 10,000 to 40,000, and some of that came about because of the pressure on the Republicans, particularly in the marginal districts, to say, we're getting hurt. Affordability is a big issue. You need to deal with this. So I think reaching out to your representatives, especially those that are in districts represented by Republicans, I think that's very, very important. And then communicating with your state legislators to make sure that even if we have to deal with this, that we're making the best choices. I always say even in a tough situation, there are always options, and let's make sure we're making the smartest options. And one of the concerns I've always had in my time as controller, remember I was in the assembly for 20 years,
course,
right? I understand the pressures of being on a legislator where, everybody wants to hear what more you're doing as far as spending and programs and so on. And I understand that as a controller, you look at things a little differently. There are opportunities for us to be a bit more efficient and smarter about how we're spending some of our money. So I'm hoping that part of what we do as we try to keep the state budget in balance is that where we have to make some tough choices on spending, we make those choices in a way that does not hurt people, does not curtail services. If it forces us to be a bit smarter about how we spend some of our money, even with a program like Medicaid, as important as it is, it's also a very expensive program. We've done a lot of audits that shows there are ways to save some money without hurting people. So, having people at the grassroots level communicate their priorities, let the legislators know, looking at what the choices are. And as we move forward, certainly for the next budget cycle, tough questions on spending and on taxation as well, which is always, a tough debate because, the issue of affordability is an important one across the board. The issue of taxpayer migration is a challenge for us as well. So these are, I hate to paint it's not a totally dire situation. It's a complex situation, though. But I think we need to just fall back on the fact that we're New York. We're resilient. Thank God we're in a state with a strong, strong labor movement. Unions make a big difference here and have always been part of the great balance to make sure that everyday people are not left out of the discussion. So those of us in public office, we need to be working with the state Fed, with our unions across the state, making sure that the decisions we're making are going to help everyday people, working people get through this tough time. And then let's hope, in the not too distant future, we'll see some changes at the federal level, bring it back a little more to the center than what we have right now. So I'm always going to be the optimist.
I like that.
I wouldn't be staying in government this long if I wasn't an optimist.
That's a good point.
But we have to keep, I also say, just got to keep a cool head, right? We're going to get through it. We've been through crazy times before.
Right.
You just don't want to see people hurt. And I think that's the part that I feel. I think too many folks are going to get hurt. And I'd like to think in New York, we're going to do everything we can to minimize that hurt. I feel bad for some of the people that live in other states where they don't have the kind of union movement that we have here, that don't have the kind of policymakers and elected officials that we have here. So let's work together. Let's be optimistic. We're going to navigate through this tough time.
All right, great. Well, before I let you go, I encourage people to go to your website because the amount of audits, reports, and information you have on there, it's so valuable. Is there anything that you have just come out or is coming out that you want people to know about? Any new programs?
Well, we're certainly going to be updating, the federal information and the tool that you mentioned at the outset. We just had an audit that came out on Department of Health supervision of adult care facilities. Now, these aren't nursing homes. This is, folks one step before that may need assisted living, can't live independently. And again, we found opportunities for the Department of Health to do a much better job of their oversight and monitoring of how people are cared for, being more responsive when a violation is found to make sure that it is remedied. And so we'll end on a very positive note because people should look for unclaimed funds.
Of course, that
I
has
always
to
have
be
to remind everybody.
That has to be a popular button on your site.
It is, and we're doing everything we can to remind people that these accounts are there. It could be in your name, could be for your union local, it could be for your church or synagogue, your mosque, your business, individuals. A lot of the accounts, because they go back decades, are in the name of people who passed away. So I always say to folks, when you go to our website, click on unclaimed funds. You can search right online, but don't just put in your name or any direct contact you have with individuals or organizations. But perhaps you have a parent or grandparent who's passed away. We may need more documentation for you to get that money, but we have a lot of accounts that really are inheritance situations. So we want to encourage people to look. So that, especially in tough times, don't let us hold on to your money. You should be
It's
getting
your
it
money.
yourself.
Go get it.
And we've made it a lot easier.
Good.
And I think, as you know, we have a new initiative working with the legislature where on any new claims, $250 or less, if we have the reliable information, we'll actually send the check before you even have to come to us. So that's been a new effort that's just started in January of this year. So we're trying to be helpful, getting more money back into people's pockets.
Yeah, that's great. A $250 threshold.
Yep.
Okay, excellent. Well, what a great conversation, as always. Thank you very much. I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Great to be with you.
Joining me on the podcast is Liz O'Neill. Hi, Liz.
Hi, Darcy.
So a lot of information there from the Comptroller with this new guide, and I think it's really going to be a useful tool for people who are trying to really understand where all this federal money goes in New York.
Absolutely. The federal budget that was just passed is going to have real impacts on working people in New York and across the country. So for New Yorkers here, it's really important that they understand, how this is going to impact them. And this is an excellent tool.
And I took a look around a little bit, and it really drills down. I mean, you can go in, you can see in your county specifically how you're impacted. So we'll be sure that if you look at our show notes, links to that guide will be there for people.
Yeah, exactly. We'll put a link in the show notes, and we're also going to put, make sure you follow us on our social media accounts. We'll put our handle in there. It's just NYS AFL-CIO. And, we post all kinds of information and updates on those pages. So it's a great resource as well.
All right, great. Thank you, Liz.
Thanks, Darcy.
This has been a production of the New York State AFL-CIO. Our president is Mario Salento. Our secretary-treasurer is Terry Melvin. We're a federation of 3,000 unions representing 2.5 million union members, retirees, and their families, with one goal: to raise the standard of living and quality of life of all working people. We keep New York State unions strong by fighting for better wages, better benefits, and better working conditions. For more information on the labor movement in New York, visit nysafl-cio.org. Until next time, stay union and stay strong.